Welcome to I Am Five Fifths. I'm your co-host, Ahmad Mansour.
And I'm your other co-host, Bill Thomason. What's up, Black?
All right, brother. How you doing?
Happy New Year. Happy New Year.
Yes, sir, man. Happy New Year. So I guess, man, in the podcast world, I guess you could say that this is our second season of I Am Five Fifths.
Oh, man. We got two in, brother.
Yeah, man.
I love it.
So this is the second season. And, so how do you think about the first season? What do you think, how did it go? How do you think we bonded with our audience?
Man, as I said when we closed out the year, I'm just elated that we did it. Okay. We stopped talking about it and we actually did it, man. Two Black men talking about Black male issues and the key word being unapologetic. So I'm happy, man, because we made the step to do something that a lot of people just talk about.
Right. Well, I know you love that word unapologetic, man. And I think that we have done a pretty good job at taking on topics that aren't necessarily easy or safe topics. And I think for the second season, I want to do more of that. But more than anything, I want to challenge, I think even starting off today, the topic that we're going to deal with today around the search for Black identity.
Right.
I think that's a very good topic, man, to start off the new year, because as you know, identity has always been something that we've had to navigate, as a race, as a culture. And today, we're seeing a society that brings up the issue of identity, and there's many different perspectives about it, whether it should be around, whether it's played out or whatever. And so I know you and I have spoken about this, and we wanted to make this the topic of this particular episode. So, brother, are you ready to throw down and give a riff on Five on the Black Hand Side?
Let's get it on, baby. Let's get it on. Let's get it on. By the way, we coming back with the Five on the Black Hand Side segment. We heard that was a hit.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
So hold on. That's my virtual slap where I gave you five on the black hand side.
Yes, sir. Yes,
so,
sir.
Man, here's my point, man. I got to start out, bro, with an article, man. This is how I'm going to start out my riff. So check this out. This is from September 3rd in the New York Times, 2021. Facebook users who recently watched a video from a British tabloid featuring Black men saw an automated prompt from the social network that asked if they would like to keep seeing videos about primates. All right, I'm going to let that sink in for a minute. Causing the company to investigate and disable the artificial intelligence powered feature that pushed the message. On Friday, Facebook apologized for what it called an unacceptable error, right? And said it was looking into the recommendation feature to prevent this from happening again. Funny. I started off my riff with that because, see, even in the artificial intelligence world, the technology is still looking at calling Black men something substandard. I went back, man, and I'm reading like some of my old books over the holidays. I'm going back to some of the classics, right? Like Black Boy, Invisible Man, the autobiography of Malcolm X. Because I feel like once a year, man, I got to go and dig deep and just remind myself that our struggle period is not over, but the identity issue is still a real one. It's like Richard Wright said in Invisible Man. He said, it's a quote in there. It says, when I discover who I am, I will be free. And anyone that has not read Invisible Man, by the way, that's something that Ahmad and I are going to work on this year. We're going to put together a book list of a book that every black man needs to read. That book's going to be at the top of the list, because even in that book, the brother that's the narrator don't even have a name. They don't even give him a name. He's just the narrator telling the story. And so I'm excited about this opportunity to talk about our image, our how we show up, because when we landed in this country as slaves some 400 something years ago, we were told what our identity was. You a slave, that's your identity. Now we have the opportunity to control our identity, control who we are, and a lot of us are still walking around like slaves. So that's my 5 on the black hand slide.
Right on, brother.
That's hold on. That's I got to make it loud. Okay.
Right on, brother. Thank you. Thank you. Well, that's great, man, because I got a slight different take on this
Okay.
topic of Black identity. And so I actually start off by saying, man, that Black identity is no longer a novel concept, and that Black America looks and acts like every population in America now. It embodies a consumer culture, and it has unenlightened values. And so really, when I look at Black identity, I see that since freedom is no longer on the table that threaten the lives of Black people, race has become pretty mute. The ideal of cultural production around art and creativity has always been tied to the struggle. And since the post 1960s, I've really seen nothing that reflects a post-civil rights construct for what it means to be Black in America. And as a result, today, especially today, I see that Blackness is weaponized for power in the realm of identity politics. You see Black people overly performing racial identity in a way that commoditizes Blackness for political, corporate, and diversity reasons. And so what you see is that in the political class, you see them often using race and mapping it to the Democratic Party for votes.
Preach, brother, preach.
Using political threats of going back to Jim Crow. And also you see the political class really not concerned about anything related to identity other than their own personal gains under the auspices of diversity and inclusion. And then you see us on TV. So these are things that are about the Black and political class using identity, but it does not improve the material conditions of struggling Black Americans who still have to endure poor schools, single parents, and crime. And so when I look at this, I see that we continue to push this race narrative, this identity narrative, because we're looking for the approval of white people. We're looking at pointing the problem to the externalities of structure and looking to see attitudes change, but we're using it all under identity. So for me, I see Black identity today as nothing but a tool to commoditize and get personal gain from. That's my riff and 5 on the Black hand side, my brother.
Man, I just gave you a high 5 on that, brother. See, man, that's why I love you, man. Because, bro, you broke that down. And see, this is why these conversations are important. Because for you and I, as Black men living in America, you know, these are the challenges that we face. And now they've taken even that. What's the word? Did you say they've weaponized it?
Yes. Well,
talk about that some more, man.
Yeah. So what I mean by that is that Black identity today is really used as a commodity. And so what I mean by weaponized is that we use the identity of Blackness to either stave off critique from others, more particularly white people. So if there's something that white people have to say, we use it to stave off critique, and we weaponize it for our own personal gain. So when we want to show up in spaces more, our arguments are often around what someone is doing to us, with the idea that that will put them in a position of pushing material changes based on our complaint, our grievance of based on race and racism. So really, Blackness has become a tool. Um, you know, DEI, for example, and I mentioned that in my thing. Like, if if you want to see gains in corporate America, we come up with these ideas around race and deficiencies in that system to try to push the corporate environment to do something for us. And a lot of times, Bill, this is pure performance that doesn't necessarily, is not steeped in data. And when it is used, and when data is used based on the ideal of disparity. And disparity does not always equal racism. Race could be a factor, but there can be a lot of other different determinants that play into why something is the way it is. But it just seems that we have come to this place in 2022, and more particularly since the George Floyd incident, where we have put race so far out in front that we're not even addressing some of the real material issues in these communities, like schools and economic mobility. It's just something that just you don't see as a core problem anymore.
So yesterday, man, we celebrated, and I say we meaning the United States, celebrated the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as a national holiday. So, there were events going on, and even in spite of COVID, folks getting together. And I was sitting there thinking that when Dr. King was alive, we had something that came out of the civil rights movement called affirmative action, right? And you and I was little kids when that came out, but my parents and uncles and whatnot, they were able to, and I don't even know if I want to use the word benefit, man. I'm not even, I can't even use that word, but they were there now, what is it? 50 years later, we got another word called diversity, equity, and inclusion. I was going to ask, is there any difference between the two?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess you're kind of seeing a new version of affirmative action, I guess philosophically you could say. But I want to step back
Okay.
and since we bring up King, and really address this issue of identity, because I really want to stay on identity. And what I realize is that in the pre-civil rights movement, identity was core to kind of holding the glue together around struggle and overcoming struggle, and this whole ideal around liberation and freedom. And that was always in the form of a movement. Like, even when you look at all of the leaders of the past, going back to Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, some of the great musicians, it was always about this concept of uplifting the race, right? So that was kind of the racial identity became the glue for our liberation. In the post-civil rights era, we've gone from being about a movement to an industry, right? And so now you look at post-civil rights, it's like an industry. And in order to construct power in your industry, you have to constantly submit race as problematic in the American zeitgeist, right? You have to submit it to corporations, you have to submit it politically, you have to submit it in all these ways in which you can continue to have gains from that. But when you really look around, using race as a marker has not necessarily and materially translated into anything within our social structure post civil rights. Actually, I heard someone, and I can't remember their name, but they mentioned how since post civil rights, we've had over, I forget, I think it's like 7,000 elected Black officials,
Mm-hmm.
in our cities and our communities. And what has that turned into? Well, for
Nothing.
me, I see a big fat zero. Now, I'm not
Nothing.
saying that progress have not been made since the post 1960s. Anyone who says that is really, really trying to not recognize growth and development within our society. But when I see how race is used everywhere along the way, it just doesn't translate into issues that are relevant to these communities that are dealing and really catching hell, in the communities that we know so well.
You know, when I'm sitting here and we're talking about just identity, and again, this podcast is really geared toward and about Black men, but just the identity of the Black community.
Right.
Both of us grew up in urban inner city America, right? You in San Francisco and me in Detroit. And during the 70s, Detroit had a famous mayor, Coleman A. Young, who was iconic in the things that he did, not just for the community, but for the Black community. And one of them was dismantling, well, not dismantling, well, yeah, yes, dismantling a racist police department and infusing Black police officers into the police department. So when I look back at things like that, when we talk about Black leadership, like I know you and I, how we feel, like we're not saying that they were absolutely useless and didn't do anything.
Right.
There were always iconic Black leaders in political positions who did some phenomenal things. I
Yeah.
mean, I start with Thurgood Marshall.
Right.
Right.
Well, yeah. I mean, definitely. Once again, I'm talking post civil rights,
Right.
and so of course I totally agree with you. I mean, there are some exceptions. When you look at the Atlanta mayor,
Maynard Jackson. And I'm
Maynard
not trying to
Jackson.
give him a pass,
Yeah,
by the
yeah, yeah.
way. Yeah.
Who was a blueprint for how you really bring Black power into
And wealth.
and yeah
And
and wealth
wealth.
and wealth into a political
Yep.
setting,
Yep.
and quite frank, a cat that no one likes to speak to because of his tragic ending.
Yeah.
But the brother in DC, man, I forget this name
Oh,
right now.
Marion Barry.
Marion Barry, right? And
Yeah.
so there are some good
Yeah.
examples, but once again, my point is that okay, let's. I want to kind of change this up.
All right.
And I want to ask you a question because you asked me a question here.
All right.
So, do you think that Black identity has material value when it comes to our representation and our needs and the needs that need to be met in some of the communities that we deal with?
I guess the way I'm gonna answer that is I look at a lot of the industries that are identified as being Black. When you think of hip hop, for example, and hip hop music, and other than maybe a few cats out here, my understanding is that most of that industry is still owned by non-Black people, and they are the ones. I don't have those statistics, but my understanding is that that's still owned and controlled by someone non-Black, meaning it's a culture that came out. Again, I'm no hip hop historian, so if anybody want to throw rocks at me, put your rocks down. I'm not a historian, but from my understanding, it came out of the inner city New York. That's really where hip hop, as we know it today, was birthed. And a lot of that industry was built on the backs of young black and brown artists. I got a friend of mine, man, who works. I just ran into him last week, and I didn't even know this. He grew up in the Bronx, and he said, "Man, I remember hanging out on the playground with LL Cool J when that brother was standing in the playground with a DJ and just rapping, and it was a young brother passing out flyers telling people to come listen to him. Oh, by the way, his name was Russell Simmons." And both of those men are now iconic in the hip hop industry, and they've done well for themselves. But I look at like LL, he's an actor on TV now on NCIS, I believe. And Russell, I think they went after him during the Me Too movement. He's out of the country. I don't even know if he ever coming back. So I guess, man, I want to answer it like this, Ahmad. I believe, like you're right. I believe they have taken the black identity, they've weaponized it, and they've monetized it.
Well, first of all, when you say they, who are you referring to?
Oh,
they
okay.
versus
Like the man, the man standing behind the wizards.
Right.
Yeah, it's not the dude. What is that for? The Wizard of Oz,
Right.
behind the curtain pulling the string.
Right.
I would just call it mainstream. The mainstream world.
That's where I would disagree with you on.
Okay.
Like first of all, I know that a lot of times we kind of set up, the power dynamics, of blacks in America as kind of us against, the man or the system,
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm speaking to is when I say they, I am talking about the black political, corporate, and media class, right?
Okay. All right.
And so what I'm saying is that these are the people who benefit from peddling identity, right? They're the ones that construct the narratives around Black misery and pain in a way in which they could use as a bargaining chip for their own gain, right? So when it comes to the Black political class, for example, what I'm saying is that they have mapped themselves into the Democratic Party, and they don't necessarily materially come through, as we're seeing now today with Biden, with anything that's related to the Black ask, right? But they do peddle race right around election times, whether it's our voting rights of Black people, or that they're going to be challenged. We're going to go back into Jim Crow. I mean, like you'll see race come up. You'll see the issues of race and policing, because that becomes the way of getting Black people to the polls. So they're weaponizing race as a way of creating this sense of insecurity. And so even when you look at Black corporate America, I mean, think about it. How do you go from a situation in Minnesota with a white officer's neck on knee on the neck of a poor Black man? How do you go from that situation to everything in corporate America being about DEI?
And Target now deciding we want to give $50 million to Black folks. Oh, and by the way, all these other companies started lining up to start giving millions of dollars after they saw this. And what's that got to do with it?
What it has to do with it, and whose hands is it going into? It's going into the hands of the Black political media class, media nonprofit class, right? the people who got big megaphones to speak on behalf of these communities. So I really like look at that group. I look at them as kind of the, they set themselves up as the gatekeepers using racial identity, right? And I think that's really the challenge. So before we start not before we start the podcast, but before I came on, I began to think about racial identity and what's being formed out there, right? So I came up with a couple of different groups that are kind of representing racial identities, and they're all benefiting off of the commodity of race and blackness, right? So
Okay,
you
I
kind of
can't
have
wait to
like,
hear this.
yeah. So the first one that I call kind of like it's woke blackness. It's that
That's
black.
a group.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm calling them, the woke. I'm calling them
Oh,
woke.
okay, okay,
The woke blackness. That's what I'm
okay.
calling them, right?
Oh, okay, okay. I
And
got you.
the way I would describe them is kind of they are the black political and media class that weighs heavily on identity. They see all problems through a structural lens, and their critique is on the externalities of the problem, right? And as I talked about before, they map themselves to the Democratic Party, and and really institutionalizing blackness within the Democratic Party. And so then you have kind of like this second group that I call, they're the black anti-racist and racial rejectionists, right? And these are people who push more of a conservative kind of respectability, assimilationist politics. They are fervent about denying or downplaying racism and the events that occur in our American zeitgeist around race. And they're almost playing the role of the apologist and the myth buster. And they're wedded more to the kind of a tradition of race, right? So that's what they put out there. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with these guys, but that's everyone from John McCorder
Oh,
to
yeah,
to
yeah,
Glenn Lowry,
yeah.
to guys like what's his name, Thomas Chatterton Williams. These are all guys like, for example, like Thomas Chatterton Williams. He's a race rejectionist, right? So he's a black man that wrote a very interesting book around how he was leaving race because after the birth of his child, he had a child with a white French woman. He saw that his child had very little characteristics of someone who we would call black. And so he began to really question whether race and race essentialism could be part of how he created identity for him and his family. So he decided that he couldn't and walked away from the concept of race. So he's now rejecting race as a construct, all in all.
Okay.
So it's just very interesting that you have all these different people out here speaking to race and identity, but it's almost as a commodity. I'm going to keep on saying that.
I was just sitting here thinking, remember, man, you just got back from Europe and, going to Portugal and England and Spain. And what was it you told me, man, that share? I love for you to share that again, man, where you mentioned when they identify someone as, what was it, black? Like, well,
Yeah, it was that was a moment for me. Now I've been to Europe 1,000 times, right? And for some reason, my sensibilities were just more heightened around things for whatever reason. Um, but on a couple of occasions, when I was in Portugal, when I was in Spain, I realized when we were having conversations and we had to use identity as a marker of distinction, right? Just in a regular conversation, um, I use the word Black man,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the people around me didn't know what that meant because I put a lot of emphasis on that as a
Mm-hmm.
Black man, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, so what does that mean? And their response was that they called me a darker man. Now, it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't like they said, no, no, you're not Black, you're a darker man. No, they just, my marker was as a darker man. And what I realized at that moment was that when they referred to me as a darker man, it was just an identity marker, no different than someone who has red hair,
Mm-hmm.
or someone who is 6'4" versus being 5'4".
Mm-hmm.
And so it really hit me at that moment that as a Black man holding that was tied to a lot of stuff, brother, here in the United States,
Mm-hmm.
that's tied to a history, that's tied to a set of assumptions, that's tied to an experience that many of us bond over.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really began to make me kind of pause and really think about myself, what is identity, especially in the context of being Black and being male.
You know, a few weeks ago, man, we lost a titan of a Black man in the Black community, and that was Sidney Poitier. Um, if you know anything about him, man, he was a lot more than just an actor. Brother did a lot of amazing things. And so the day he passed away, man, I went deep in my archives and said, man, I want to go look at a few of his movies, man, just to kind of, pay homage to him, man. Now, of course, the classics, man, the Uptown Saturday Night, Let's Do It Again, right? All the classics with him and Bill Cosby. But the one I decided to watch was Paris Blues. I don't know if have you ever seen that one? That's the one with him, Diane Carroll, Joanne Woodward, and Paul Newman, where he plays a jazz artist who has left the United States and has moved to Paris. This is in the late 50s, early 60s. And the one, man, it's a scene where him and Diane Carroll are walking across a bridge and they're having this dialogue about Black America, but his as a Black man and how he's viewed and how he's seen and how he's treated, and how when he went to Paris, it was a totally different situation for him. Now, remember, this is pre Martin Luther King and all that. And what I'm saying is that I know, because I've been to Europe, just like you, the Black identity of the Black man is viewed very differently when we leave this country. It's why when people ask me to speak to schools and go in and talk to young kids, one of the first things I tell them is get a passport so you can go leave this country and you can get a better identity, not a better look at not just how the United States views you, but how the world sees you. Because if you stay in the United States and you stay here and have just this only United States America view of how they look at Black men and how Black men are searching for that identity, you will be lost, because you need to look at the world from a global perspective. Because for one, let's be blunt, on a global perspective, there are more darker men on a global perspective than there are any other race, meaning lighter men, right? Now, I can't give statistics, but I know from a global perspective, there are more men of color, darker men in the world than there are of men who don't have that, who are not colored or white.
No, yeah. I mean, it's interesting because, for me, and, I'm not necessarily making the rest of the world to be Disneyland around,
Mm-hmm.
the different, how people respond to different groups, because even in Europe, you take for the French example, it's interesting because, the French, and I think what they take a lot of pride in is that they don't have any racial categories, and really when we're talking about racial identity, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the categorization of race. And, we all know that race is from a biological standpoint, it really has a very small variation, between, what one can say, one race versus the other. And really, to tell you the truth, that's really based on populations and not necessarily race. Race was essentially a construct that was made up here in America as a way of classifying,
People.
people, period, right?
Yep.
But it's interesting because when you go to France, they don't have race categorizations, but I don't want to let them off the hook because they still treat, people of color, like trash. Right now, some will say that's because it more maps to them being immigrants, which could be, but really what I find is, and I want to pose this as a question to you, is that definitely leaving the shores of America puts you in a very ponderous situation around identity. And so you had used the word searching for identity with Black men. Do you think that's what we're doing? Do you think that's where we are, and that's the challenge, that we're actually searching for identity is that to be something that represents Blackness, or is that something to represent something that doesn't take on the designation of Blackness?
As I have a new term I coined. Here's my 2 cents, spend it well. I think that there are a large number of Black men now that is just searching for their identity and who they are and where they might fit in the world. And I'll just speak from my own experience as a Black man in America. When I think of a lot of the brothers that I've been exposed to over the years, young and old, some older than me, some my age, some younger, that a lot of them are still trying to be something that maybe inherently they're not.
Can
Because
you just kind of fret that out a little bit?
yeah, because I think a lot of brothers, like I remember one of the earlier podcasts, you joked with me about liking Fleetwood Mac, right? And for a lot of Black men and Black folks in period, I'm using a very simple. I remember growing up, I was listening to a lot of, I just call it non-Black music. Now, hey man, I love my Steve. I'm from Detroit, man, so I love my Motown, love my Stevie, my Temps, my Dianas, the Jackson 5, on and on. But I was also listening to Fleetwood Mac and Led Zeppelin and the Eagles. And I remember people looking at me saying, that's not Black. That's Black. That ain't Black music. And as a kid, see, I didn't care because that's just how I was. But I think a lot of men and women, but I'll say Black men, they will do things that they might not otherwise want to do because they want to fit in. It's kind of like when I used to joke with all my boys when we would get our first jobs coming out of college. Most of us went to work in, be blunt, all white environments. And I used to have a running joke with, I would say, how many days did it take them before they asked you if you wanted to play on the basketball team, right? If the company had a basketball team, right, or a sports team, because that's how they identified us, right? Immediately we walk in, Ahmad, you what, 6'4"? I know people look at you and they don't know the brilliant Black man you are, but immediately I'm sure a lot of cats looked at you and immediately say, oh man, I know he played ball. And I guess when we started the conversation today, and I started out with Facebook, and their AI calling us primates is because this is how, as I'm giving my discussion, I want to change our narrative. I want to show us that there are Black men that are doing all different kinds of things. We don't all have to listen to the same music. We don't all have to like the same things. We're as varied as any other group. But I think I hope is that Black men listening to this podcast, whoever you are, wherever you are, the thing I always want to get across is that I would hope you would just stay true to who you are, whatever that may be.
Well, that's very interesting, and I love that, and I think what that reminds me of is the whole ideal around Black men and self-agency. The idea that we are searching for an identity. It makes sense, especially based on what you just said, because I think, we don't necessarily allow ourselves to fall into our interests, our behaviors, our authenticity in ways that doesn't reflect the dominant narrative or just the dominant set of behaviors, that we often want to lead with. And that is an essential part of really finding your identity in a way that even transcends the notion of Blackness and being a Black man, because even when you think of being a Black man, and I would put this question to you, that what makes us Black men? Is it that we're bonded together by an identity that is based on struggle, based on how we are perceived by the American zeitgeist, or is there something else that represents our identity that becomes the glue? And, that's a rhetorical question, but feel free to answer that, because I see Black men, like I said, you mentioned a search for identity. I see it as a search for self-agency and self-authorship,
Okay.
and that puts us in the world in a way that allows for us to fully be realized as human beings. And I think a lot of that really has to come down to challenging certain assumptions around what it means to be a Black man, and going on your way.
Man, I'm listening to you and I'm just sitting here like, we did pick a heavy topic, didn't we, bro?
Yeah.
We did. And I'm glad we did, because one of the things that I'm getting out of this just from listening to you is that, as I'm continuing just to think this thing through of what, again, the title being The Search for Identity, and, I'm in my 50s now. I like to think I know who I am now, right? If I ain't figured out who I am by now, then shame on me. But
well, not 100% of where you are, who you are. Otherwise, we would have to just go ahead and drop you 6 feet under, bro.
Well, hey,
anyway,
it's a daily growth, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's daily. Growth is daily, but at the core, I know who I am. And you asked about, what is it? And the first thing that came to me, man, again, just off the top of my head, I had a vision of when I first went to college, and I walked into the cafeteria as a freshman, this big old cafeteria. And the first thing I did was I looked around and I saw a group of people, all black, sitting at a table that were all sitting together. And I said, well, do they know each other? And then, of course, and you got to understand, I went to a state school, right?
Right,
So
right.
there was hundreds of people in this cafeteria, but they were all the black kids was in one table, and it might have been some others scattered around. And you know me, man, I'm like, I'm gonna go sit at the non-black table because I want to just see what's up, right? I'm in engineering. I'm like, I'm gonna meet some other folk. But a lot of us, I think, would have picked the black table because they felt comfortable there,
Right.
and because of the skin color that has bonded us together. Because that's the only thing I saw when I walked in that cafeteria, right? Was skin color. I didn't see nothing else. So as I'm thinking about what you just said, man, what I think for what, whether we want to admit it or not, I think it's skin color, dark skin color, black skin color, whatever you want to call it. That's one of the things that has gives us our identity in the world. When we walk around, I remember when Tiger Woods was saying, "I'm not black, I'm Malaysian," and he did. I guess he didn't want to disrespect his mother's heritage. And then we was joking like, "Hey man, if you get pulled over by the popo, they gonna say, hey, you black. They ain't gonna be calling you Malaysian."
Well, that's that's so true, man. I know he got a lot of heat for that.
He did.
But that's the point in the issue there, because yeah, I mean, skin color, but we map skin color to race. I mean, now, like I said, phenotypically, skin color is just skin color. It is that is more mapped to populations than the socially constructed ideal of race. But you can't totally dismiss race because it's embedded into the American culture in so many different ways. One way of which is what you just said, the fact that, we can, the relationship that we have with police still puts race, as a marker for being treated differently. But it's interesting, man, because when you say that they were all sitting at the table, and there was a book actually written, "Why Are all the black kids sitting at the table at the same table?"
Yeah, I've seen that. Yep,
But
I've seen it.
you know, but what really had all of the black people at the table? Is it a sense of insecurity? Is it a sense of, what is the bonding agent other than just black skin? Is it because I would assume that when you get to college, you all come from different type of neighborhoods. So is it just the fact that, we all have a culture that can connect us? Now, we're not the only ones that do that. I mean,
No, oh no,
right?
no, right. Oh yeah, yeah.
However, this ideal around feeling a need to go there, I mean, that happens a lot with black people in a lot of different environments that they go in, right? And we have a tendency to want to put a big stamp, a big black stamp that says, I am black. And so that becomes your identity for how you are expecting someone to interpret you. And so, what I think about is, is there a sense of insecurity that becomes our blanket? Because, man, I got to tell you, speaking about travel, Dollar Bill, there's been times when I've traveled, and I'm gonna be 100% honest with you on this, but there's been times when I traveled and you would see black people out and traveling, and man, they're wearing shirts, that says, black traveler, you know, and something that's identifying themselves out in the world like that. And I'm just wondering, first of all, when I see that, I'm not attracted to it. You know, actually, I become, you know, somewhat reluctant about, you know, creating connections with them. It's just a turnoff for me, right?
I got you.
But you know, I wonder, why is it necessary for us to wear Black identity on our sleeves so prominently, even when we leave outside of the source that we consider to be the place of oppression? Well, some consider to be the place of oppression.
You know, here's why. I mean, I can't. You know, I know that was just something you put out.
I want you to answer that. I want you to answer.
I mean, okay. You know, it's going. I'm gonna answer it like this. When you and I decided to do this podcast, you know, both of us started doing research on podcasting and wanting to sign up for all the different services. And then I saw there's an organization called Black Podcasters.
Right.
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 And I'm like, how come we just can't be some podcasters? Exactly. Right.
Right.
But it's like, I think people, you know, this is what I'm and here's how I'm gonna answer it. You know, I say this to you all the time, man. Take away this technology, take away these cell phones, take away a lot of these things, man. And at the core, we still tribal animals. We all want to exist in a tribe and be identified with the tribe. You take away who we are at the very core of, you know, and as I call, look, I'm not going to get overly spiritual, but I call, this is my earth suit. This is my suit for earth. Mine just happened to be dark, black. I think a lot of those Black people just trying to identify with something and identify with their tribe. Like when I saw the whole thing around Black podcasters, right? Hashtag, right? You got hashtag Black podcaster. I just want to be a podcaster.
Right.
Right. I want to be a podcaster. Now, what's my podcast about? It's about Black men, conversations for Black men. But it don't have to necessarily be only for Black men. We welcome other people to listen to our podcast. In fact, I know me and you tell other people that are non-Black about our podcast.
Well, in addition to that, I don't think that we are, you know, and I know you and I have had discussions on this, that we're not just about talking about Black men more than it is about Black men having a platform to express themselves. So, because that, to me, that's what I see as the challenge, is that especially in this identity politics driven world where, you know, Black men as a population group is not part of the hierarchy of needs that are being put out, you know, in the marketplace around, you know, who gets access or gets to be expressed. And so I see this as a way of getting Black men to do what you talked about earlier, to come here to talk about anything. Doesn't necessarily have to be Black, about Black issues, even though we like to hit on those, but really about Black men just being able to show up in the myriad of ways that you mentioned earlier. You know, when you talked about, you know, listen to Fleetwood Mac, you know, like, hey, if a Black man wants to come on here and do an hour talking about Fleetwood Mac,
you gonna give him some grief. You gonna sweat that, brother.
I am gonna sweat him. I am gonna sweat him. No doubt.
But if you want to come on and talk about George Clinton,
but if I sweat him, it won't be because he is a Black man listening to Fleetwood Mac. It will be because he's listening to Fleetwood Mac. You know? So man, we might have to mix it up. We might have to get some Fleetwood Mac and some George Clinton on here. I hear you, brother. Absolutely.
Hey, Well, look, man, I know we've been rapping for a minute. This is one of those topics I know, man, where me and you probably could go on for a
Yeah,
few hours.
probably come back, but I think
Yeah.
it's a good way to start the year with something that I
Yes,
think
sir.
continues to bubble up in this country, and really needing to find a way to give people room to not just show up in a Black identity by default. I mean, so if you really feel that Black identity is the core source and a core driver of, what makes you human, what makes you relevant, and what brings value to you, that's all good. But really, what I wanted to do today is to really bring light of how race is being used in America today by many people inside our community and out, but also to make room for those who are somewhat reluctant about wearing, the wearing identity or feeling a need to wear it because it's part of the herd.
I just had a moment of just remembering for Christmas, someone white gave me a Christmas ornament, all black, with Black Lives Matter painted on it, right? And when I got it, I mean, it was a Christmas gift, right?
Right.
So on one hand, you do want to be respectful,
Right.
right? But on the other hand, I'm looking at this Christmas gift, bruh. I mean, this Christmas ornament, and it had Black Lives Matter painted on it. And I think that is one of the things we talked about, or how this thing is being monetized.
Commodity,
right?
Man. Totally.
Right. So, because I guarantee you that the folks behind Black Lives Matter, whoever they are, because we don't even know who behind Black Lives Matter anymore, right. I'm sure they didn't get no royalties or nothing on that ornament, right? Somebody, maybe in China, right? Made this Christmas ornament, put Black Lives Matter on it, and they sold it to somewhere in the United States. Well, I think that's a perfect example, dude, of how this crap, man, and I call it crap because I'm trying not to cuss on a podcast, but I look at how Black Lives Matter has been put on anything you can think of right now. A t-shirt. They probably got some Black Lives Matter. I know ball players been wearing Black Lives Matter on their cleats and their gym shoes.
And one of the things we know, Dollar Bill, is that the proceeds of that is not going to the material conditions of poor Black people in America.
Oh no.
So next time, brother, I'm up in the Bay Area. Let's play a game, man. You could take that Black Lives Matter bub and throw it up in the air, man. I'm gonna see if I can shoot it out of the air. Let me see how
just make sure we're in the right neighborhood when we do it, so we don't get shot back.
or go to jail, depending on the neighborhood. But anyhow, man, yeah. So this has been a great discussion, brother. I'm glad we opened this up.
Yes,
so
sir.
I just want to say to the audience that you could check us out at iam5fifths.com. That's spelled out .com, and there you'll find all of our podcasts, as well as having options of going to places where it's distributed, like Spotify, Google, Stitcher, etc. And we have articles on our website, as well as all of our recordings. So, Brother Dollar Bill, I want to thank you, man, for getting this hang in with me, my brother.
Hey, man, it's all good, man. And what we hope to do over time, I'll just add, is build our community out. We're working on that. We need to put the things in place where we can have people give us feedback,
Right.
and build out this community. And we got some nice surprises coming down the line.
Absolutely.
We ain't gonna blow it.
Right. No big reveal right now, man.
Yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
That's the word I'm looking for. No big. What's that when the kids? I mean, when the parents have
that's the reveal.
Call it the baby reveal.
That's the reveal, man.
Yeah, we ain't no reveals yet, man.
Right,
but hey, brother, as always, it's a pleasure doing this with you, man. Going on this journey with you. I'm hoping, man, with the information we share. I said I might not change anybody's mind, but I want people to use your mind when you think about the things that Ahmad and I talk about. Look, man, I just want brothers to be in a position where they can think on their own, make their own decisions, and hold their heads up high, man, and be strong.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen some horrible things happen to Black men over the last few years.
Right.
Black man just getting shot by some white folks just because he jogging down the street. Right. I mean, so you and I want us to hold our heads high, not walk around in fear. Hey, man, we might go out somewhere and toss that bad boy up and start shooting it. Because, I want, the key word for me is, man, I'm fearless. Right. I refuse to let any of these incidents, these people have me walking around in fear.
So the key word for me is, as I said, is agency. But one last statement, because I think we have to get out of here, is I think, man, I'm going to write a little article for our website where I'll put up some books that they can recommend. I got about 3 different books that I think would be helpful to help facilitate your own kind of intellectual and philosophical understanding of this topic, because I think we're at a moment where it should be something to think about.
Well, hey, man, my book, I dropped it earlier in the podcast.
Yeah.
A must read for any Black man, Invisible Man by Ralph Ellis. And did you know that's the only novel he ever wrote?
Yeah. Well, the other one got burned up, man. So it's a terrible tragedy. But let's get out of here, my brother.
All right, brother.
Thank you, and peace, man.